We are exploring the amount of resources that will be needed in order to change transportation systems to electric vehicles. In order to drive all vehicles on electricity, we would in Europe need to use 50% of our present power generation. We need electrification strategists and electrification architects. Many people also have what we in Sweden call the life puzzle. We could always change the architecture of cities. If oil production is going to decline, we will need to change transportation systems to renewable fuels, and we can't wait to do that.
That is Mats Larsson, founder of the Global Energy Transformation Institute based in southern Sweden. Mats has over 30 years of experience as a business and management consultant, supporting hundreds of companies in a large number of industries with business development and growth strategies. Mats has a passion for guiding our world towards sustainable large-scale transformation of our energy system and has actively been supporting the systemic shift from conventional oil and gas mobility towards widespread electrification of our transport system through on-the-ground projects, system thinking, mapping of opportunities, and several books on the topic. My name is Peter Marcus Bach, and this is the Grand Challenges Podcast, a show about inspiring individuals who are stepping up to tackle the global challenges that our world is facing in their own unique ways. We reflect on the many out-of-the-box ways our guests have navigated the complexity and intricacies of the environment at the cutting edges of science, engineering, technology, and design. On today's show, Mats and I explore just how much is required to revolutionize and electrify our mobility system, from not only the technological and infrastructural requirements, but also the societal shifts that need to occur. We review the current state of progress, the options that we have, and what still needs to be done if we want to transition towards sustainable mobility and generally global sustainable electrification in the next few decades. Detailed information is provided in the show notes over at petermbach.com/podcast. Thank you for joining us today, and please enjoy the show. Mats, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Peter.
You're based in Sweden, a place I've visited in the past, close to Malmö to be exact. Can you tell me exactly where you are?
I'm in the middle of the wonderful region of Skåne, the southernmost part of Sweden, in a small town called Höör.
Höör.
H-O-O-R, but with dots above the O's.
Well, being half German, I'm very familiar with the dots on vowels like O's and A's and U's. I'm not sure about the circles, but that's definitely Swedish. I tried to learn that once before. Not entirely sure of the pronunciation.
No, it's Höör, H-Ö-Ö-R. So.
Okay. Höör, yeah.
Yes, like Malmö.
Malmö, yeah. Either way, I mean, Malmö, I've been there once in the past, and I've been in other places in Sweden, like Uppsala and Stockholm. And yeah, lovely country. Must be beautiful this time around with the autumn colors.
It's wonderful, yes. We've very blessed with nice weather all autumn so far. So it's really nice.
And perfect weather as well, I guess, for one of your hobbies, which is to go running in the forests, right?
Yes. Although I stopped running in the forest a couple of years ago when we got wolves here in southern Sweden migrating from the north. So we had a few at some points behind our garden. So I'm a little cautious and I didn't want to run in the woods anymore. So I now run in our small village.
Yeah, I remember Sweden fondly, mainly because I like to go jogging. Well, should do that more, but I'm in the gym nowadays. But the longest jog I have ever done that felt like the easiest jog as well was a 10-kilometer jog up the Fyris River in Uppsala, Sweden. That was many years ago now, but yeah, fond memories of the beautiful countryside.
Thank you for mentioning it. And yes, there are many nice places all over Sweden, and I really recommend people to visit us.
Yeah. So what are your top three?
The top three. I've not been so much to the north, so I'd say Stockholm, obviously. Well, the region I live, there are two corners. The southeast corner, Österlen, which is very nice with a lot of nice scenery, fishing villages, and the northwest, which is slightly more hilly and wonderful coastline, which I really recommend visiting.
Okay, fishing villages. When I hear fishing villages in Sweden, I think immediately of surströmming, the fermented herring.
That's up north.
Yeah, but definitely very famous delicacy. I guess, listeners, if you're interested, go try it. It's definitely an adventure. It's fermented herring, as far as I understand correctly. And you eat it with some dried cracker bread, I believe.
Yes, exactly. It's very it's a delicacy for those who have learned to enjoy it, but it's an acquired taste, I think, and you need to. It's not for everyone.
No, very, very, definitely a very interesting dish and adventurous dish as well. But hey, you can try it and say you've tried it. That's the main thing. Badge of honor. But yeah, Sweden. And there's also the fika, so the coffee breaks with, I always remember the kanelbuller. Can't get the original ones anymore since I'm not in Sweden, but when I go to IKEA, sometimes I have that option. So yeah, lots of memories and the culture coming back to me.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and Malmö itself, I mean, they say it's famous for crime novels. Sweden's generally a very safe place, but Malmö seems to always be the setting for a lot of crime novelists.
Yes, we have a number of internationally famous crime novelists, and there are also crime TV series that have been shot in Malmö and in Copenhagen. For example, the bridge a couple of years ago that became really famous around the world and got a lot of viewers.
I must check that out. I'm assuming they're referring to the bridge that does connect Malmö and Copenhagen.
It does, yes.
Also a very scenic ride. So a little bit of geography, listeners, but we're doing this because Mats, you are the first guest from Sweden. So very excited to have you here today and to really talk about what you're doing in the space of energy.
Yes, thank you. I'm really interested in energy and have been researching this for the past, say, 20 years now and written a few books. So that's really one of my favorite areas to talk about.
I'm looking forward to tracing your steps. So you're the founder of the GET Institute, so the Global Energy Transformation Institute. And tell me briefly what the mission of GET is.
Yes, we are exploring the amount of resources that will be needed in order to change transportation systems to electric vehicles. And also exploring the amount of resources needed to do other big changes in society, like changing to a circular economy. And wherever we look, we find that more resources will be needed to do these things than most people have realized, and even more will be needed than most experts and decision makers have realized.
It feels like we often have this monolithic challenge ahead of us, and whatever we do is never enough. And I'm sure we'll see that as a recurring theme because we've only just realized, well, just being in the previous decades, that if we do things the way nature does, so the natural cycles, the circular cycles, then, we're actually much better off for it.
Yes.
But you weren't always in the energy space. You actually studied business and administration at Lund University and you finished in 1987. And actually for quite some time, you worked more on the business side, things like supply chain management and I guess general business administration. So where did that interest in energy come from? How did it start?
Well, my interest in energy is actually related to business and the business aspects of the change to sustainability. So it's about why my interest started when I realized that if we want to change to renewable fuels and specifically to electric vehicles, we will need to invest a lot of money. And we will not only need to invest in the vehicles themselves, but we will also need to build the systems that will be needed in order to operate those vehicles on a daily basis. So in order to run large numbers of electric vehicles, we also need enough power, enough grid capacity. We need charging infrastructure, and we also need competent people to run all the projects that need to be run. And we need to plan the development of these system solutions that will be needed. So we need electrification strategists and electrification architects with different focus. And that was, I didn't realize that when I started, but I realized we need a lot of resources. We need to make big investments, and nobody talked about that at the time. And they still don't talk very much about it at this time. So there is a big need for people to realize that it's not going to change by itself. The change to new transportation systems needs to be managed, and it needs to be directed towards certain system solutions that are more cost effective and more user friendly than other possible system solutions that we could think of.
Yeah, you've highlighted that it's a whole system change. And let's unpack that a bit. I mean, if we think, what do we need to create sustainable mobility? And I mean, we've had some past mentions of sustainable mobility on the show as well, but it's not just changing the cars. It's not just replacing the internal combustion engine, which has pretty much dominated mobility for, I guess, more than a century now. Am I right? More than a century? I'm losing
yes, you
track
are.
of time here.
Yes.
But it's also providing the infrastructure for that. I mean, it's not just the roads, and maybe the roads can play a role there. But with electrical vehicles comes the charging stations, as you mentioned, but also the knowledge behind how do you then maintain such vehicles? How do you, I guess, plan for the kind of technology that has performance differences to the standard combustion engine? I mean, all I know is usually electrical vehicles, they take off pretty quickly. At least I've heard Teslas can accelerate very decently on the streets. And they do have a range limit like combustion engines, but much shorter. And yeah, it's not just a matter of stopping at a petrol station, or a charging station and waiting like 5 minutes for the tank to be filled. This is a very different kind of lifestyle and a different kind of management, as you said.
Yes, absolutely. And well, it may seem at this point when we've still had electric vehicles for 10, 15, 20 years already, that this change will be like a walk in the park. But still, in Europe overall, we only have 3% electric vehicles. And that amount is, the average in many countries like Germany, the UK, I believe they have 3.5, 4%, France, and many other countries, the share stands around 3%. And in some countries like Sweden, Norway, in Sweden we have 14% electric vehicles. In Norway, they have 20%, I believe. But we also have much more electricity, both in Norway than in Sweden compared to Europe. But in order to drive all vehicles on electricity, we would in Europe need to use 50% of our present power generation to charge the vehicles on a regular basis.
Oh, wow.
And that share increases during winter because electric vehicles lose some range in cold weather. So 50% of power generation means that we need to invest huge amounts of money in power generation, but we also need to invest large amounts in power grids because the present power grids are not dimensioned for the charging of large numbers of electric vehicles in parallel. And most drivers today, of course, people who bought electric vehicles over the past decade or 2 decades, electric cars, electric trucks, they are the ones who could most easily charge them at home or with trucks at the depot, and to some extent, of course, along motorways and major roads and so on. But in order for all vehicles to become electric, as the EU and many national governments have envisioned, a lot more, huge amount of chargers needs to be installed along motorways, along major roads, and in many places. And power grids need to be reinforced, and power generation needs to be increased.
I guess to put that into perspective, so you said 50% of the energy use. I mean, if we change the wording of that, apparently the number is 500 terawatts of electricity per year, which is equivalent to 45 new nuclear reactors. So you're trying to implement, first of all, that power generation infrastructure. And that is a whole other tangent. Like, where are we getting the power from? Is it going to be renewables? Is it going to be nuclear? Is it going to be coal and gas? I mean, obviously not the last one. We're trying to move away from fossil fuels as well. And then, on the other hand, as you said, we need to work with the charging stations, and that on our thousands and thousands of kilometers of road, to ensure that we have a charger when someone actually needs it. And from what I understand, there was some research done by McKinsey. They calculated that the EU countries need to install 10,000 fast chargers per week across the continent if they want to meet the scenario of, I guess they're being conservative here. But apparently that is a huge difference compared to what's happening at the moment, which is we're only getting about 1,600 chargers installed per week.
Yes.
So we need to 10x the production and the rollout of infrastructure if we're going to even reach this.
Yes, that's true. And that amount of fast chargers implies a large amount of electricity needed as well, of course. And in order to feed all those fast chargers, the power grids need to be reinforced. And you can imagine probably the hotspots of charging along motorways like the Frankfurter Kreuz in Germany, where 250,000 vehicles pass every day. There would be a huge amount of charging needed. And one professor here at Lund University has estimated that there will be a need for a football field of chargers every 60 kilometers of German motorway.
Oh, wow.
But that's on the average. That doesn't take into account the hotspots where a lot more charges will be needed. And in order to charge trucks as well, there will be a need for another football field, or probably a few football fields, because lorries and trucks take much more space than cars do. And they also need much more space for maneuvering.
That is an insane amount of land uptake. And yeah, I guess for, just making sure that everything runs smoothly. And that makes me think, like, what are the alternatives to electrical vehicles? I mean, people have been testing hydrogen-powered vehicles. We have other kinds of energy storage or energy use for the vehicles. I mean, aren't these also good candidates?
As far as I understand, there is no real alternative to electric vehicles, because hydrogen could be an alternative, and that would be advantages. But the disadvantage is that producing the hydrogen would need 2.5 or 3 times the amount of electricity needed to power electric vehicles. So if we need 50% of Europe's power generation at the current rate to power electric vehicles, we would need 1.5 times the power generated at present to fuel all vehicles with hydrogen. And we don't have any infrastructure for hydrogen distribution or hydrogen production at that rate or at that scale. So it's not as if we could easily build an infrastructure for hydrogen production that could match our present infrastructure for power generation and power distribution. So there is really no alternative to electricity. We need to build the electric transportation systems as efficiently as possible.
And I guess just to make things a bit more pressing for the situation, the EU has banned sales of new petrol and diesel vehicles from 2035 onwards. So that puts a bit of a clock on the transformation process. And it seems like we're climbing a massive mountain of challenges that are not just in our transport infrastructure, but also power generation, power supply. I mean, I guess also when you're talking renewables, we've had this on the show before, in particular our discussion with Mark Swinnerton on episode 46, energy storage is becoming also a serious consideration, because especially when you're talking wind and solar, they're not generating 24/7. So yeah, how do we tackle this? I mean, on the one hand, there's the budget side, and on the other hand, there's the societal change that also needs to occur. People need to want to own electrical cars, and I guess it has to be fashionable.
Yes. Firstly, I'd like to mention that some governments, like the German, are now going back on their previous words and saying, we don't want to change this fast. We need to take more time and so on, because they realize they've seen a number of, part suppliers for the automotive companies to go bankrupt. They've listened to automotive directors like Mercedes, Daimler-Benz and Volkswagen that say that we may go bankrupt if this continues. We don't make enough money selling electric cars. We can't keep up with Chinese technology developments, so we need to rethink this. So it's likely that they will change. But the way to do it, of course, would be the way you'd plan a trip wherever you'd like to go. Like you look at the map and you make sure that you have all the details covered on the map. You take into consideration where you could fill a tank and where you could have a meal and so on. And you plan your trip accordingly. Like say, I could go 500 kilometers per day. I need to rest for the night, and I could go 500 more kilometers the next day. And the way of doing this for the change to electric vehicles would be to, of course, start to map all the activities that would be needed, like in the Apollo program. When NASA got the challenge from President Kennedy, and he decided that the United States would send a man to the moon and bring him safely back to Earth. And he gave that challenge to NASA. And they not only developed the rockets, they also figured out very immediately that they need a launch ramp. They needed a vehicle assembly building. They needed a vehicle that could take the rocket from the building to the launch ramp. They needed a space control center in Houston and so on. They needed spacesuits and everything. So when they got that challenge, they started to plan the development of all these components, all these things, small and large, that they needed in order to succeed with the challenge. And then they started to run those developments along very clear and very detailed plans, basically.
A complete change in the way you do things. And I guess with a blank slate and a challenge defined, you just have to go to that whiteboard and start, figuring out what are all the interlinking parts that you have to consider. And not to mention, the Apollo program, also the astronaut training and being familiar with, the moon being low gravity or lower than Earth, knowing how to then do the tasks that they've been assigned to as well once they land on the moon.
Yes, they had 3 different models for the approach to the moon, I think. And they decided, after analyzing the different ways of approaching, they decided for one of these alternatives, and they built the space capsule, they built the moon lander according to the plans that they had made.
No, very, very interesting. And a nice parallel as well to, I guess, think about what kind of challenge we have ahead of us as well. And so we can learn a lot from the Apollo program. I guess if we go back to the whole situation with the electric vehicles, where we're standing, it's not something that's blank slate. There has been adoption, starting with very specialized vehicles, but now with Tesla and many other companies that are manufacturing these vehicles and battery technology improving. If we look at the adoption numbers, 2023, electrical vehicles accounted for about 22.7% of new car registrations in Europe. And apparently the adoption wasn't as impressive in 24 and 25. I think the total imports in 24 were 43-ish%. And the sales, they increased somewhat in 2025, but I guess nowhere near fast enough for hitting that 2035 goal. I mean, what can we do to speed that up? Or I guess, what can we avoid? What can we do to avoid the stagnation?
Yes, that's a good question. It's this stagnating increase or reduced increase would be expected, because with most new technologies, we see that users or customers appear in the form of first innovators, then early adopters, then late adopters, and then laggards. And the early adopters and innovators, they show specific characteristics. They don't have nothing against paying a little more for a new product, and they are prepared to change their way of doing things slightly in order to be able to use a new product, like installing a charger at home or stopping by charging stations and planning their trips in order to accommodate to using a new technology. But the early majority, the big part of the market, those people are not so interested in the new technology. They simply want things to work. When they want to change to an electric car, buy an electric instead of a petrol or diesel car, they say, I do that when the price is right and when the user experience is similar to the one I'm used to. So we need to learn more about the market. We need to learn more about customer preferences and expectations. And we also then need to take steps that are based upon our understanding of this. And one of the things is that we need to continue to subsidize. And this is going to be relatively expensive for governments if we want to continue to run the change at a high pace.
Yeah, I guess that is always a challenge. What do you subsidize in terms of sustainability? And I think governments are faced not just with that, but then also, other aspects, whether it's energy at home, so solar panels. I know Australia had a subsidy program at some point for solar hot water. Then there's also the water side. So rain tanks were part of that subsidy back in the day when Australia went through a drought. Then when you think of, other places, there may be subsidies for other aspects. And so, I guess you can't just pour money into every single technology and have something left over at the end of the day. Is it then perhaps a question of rethinking our cities? Because a lot of this infrastructure exists because we do have, in many cases, we have cities sprawled across the world. We have big cities, small cities. So let's talk about walkability in cities to avoid the use of cars. Do we improve public transport? I mean, is it a combination of all of these aspects that have to come together to find the optimum solution?
Yes, I think so. But there's one aspect also that's the increased complexity of our society at present and the job market, where people increasingly need to travel distances in order to get to work. Say 30, 40 years ago, people worked close to their homes. Most companies, or like producing companies, machining companies, and so on, they were relatively similar and they required relatively similar competencies. But now companies are increasingly specialized, and to find somewhere where you can work and where you have, that demands your type of competence. Many people need to drive increasing distances, and that has increased the need for transportation in different ways, by train, by car, and so on. But many people also have what we in Sweden call the life puzzle. We need to fit things together. We not only need to go to work and back and forth, we also need to pick children up at daycare centers. We need to do our shopping. We need to go to football training or a football match, or we need to go to, well, whatever we do in our spare time, gyms for many people and so on. So to fit all these things together, the life puzzle, we say many people need a car, just not only because they like to drive, but because they actually have these distances between activities that they need to cover in order to do whatever they like to do with their time. So that's one of the necessities. And we could always change the architecture of cities and say we need to walk more. But then we also need to make it possible for people to work closer to home. We need to make it possible to go to the gym without a car and to go shopping without a car and so on.
I guess provision of lifestyle at the local level rather than at the city level. And then that in itself is a whole can of worms, because we have a lot of existing cities, a lot of existing urban sprawl. So it's not a change that can happen overnight.
No.
I guess the counter argument to, more adoption, or let's say the opposite approach, is to actually increase battery lifespans so that vehicles can go much further and that the mileage actually gets closer to, current combustion engine vehicles. What are your thoughts on that? Would that actually make it easier to then do the electrification and transformation?
In some ways, but it will not solve all the issues we have with the change, because we rarely need to go the full distance offered by the battery in one day. So most people just go like 25, 30 kilometers, if that. I don't even leave my home by car every day. So most of the time I can easily do with a battery offering me, say, 360 kilometers range. But once in a while, perhaps during the month, I go longer distances. And it's at those times that I'm challenged using an electric car. Or sometimes, as I live in the countryside, I need to rent a trailer to bring waste to the waste management site and to do things, or perhaps buy bulky stuff. So I need a trailer for that. So it's not my daily habits that cause me to want a bigger battery. It's when I need to go longer distances. But there are also people who go longer distances every day, like salespeople visiting customers, like trucks delivering goods to customers, and so on. And in order for all of us to be able to use electric vehicles for all purposes, we need to find ways of making it possible to go longer distances without long waiting times for charging and so on.
No, very fascinating. So we've discussed a lot of lifestyle changes or lifestyle factors that will influence how we use EVs. We've discussed the potential subsidies and also the difficulties with them. And I guess, in what kinds of ways and projects have you, as part of the GET Institute that you founded, tried to address this?
Well, it's been a series of projects and a series of books. I've written books based on the experiences from projects and research I've done based on the conclusions I've drawn from different projects. So I've run a number of projects in collaboration with a company called Industrial Development Center South in Malmö, where I've been an employee and also a consultant in some cases, and together with partners in EU projects around the South Baltic. I've done projects investigating the need for charging infrastructure and how that could be solved. 10 years ago, more than that, I've done projects where we've invested in chargers around the South Baltic in various places at an early stage, an EU Interact project. We are running a project developing 4 different services for the implementation of electric vehicles, like a mapping service to see how much power, how much charging infrastructure will be needed in different areas in cities in order to charge vehicles that visit those areas. We looked at, together with a utility, last year I looked at a logistics area outside the city of Helsingborg in southern Sweden, where 80% of all fruit and vegetables that are imported to Sweden are delivered. And well, they pass through there on their way to other parts of Sweden. So we looked at there are 1,400 trucks coming every day.
Oh, wow.
To either deliver goods from parts of Europe or to bring goods across to different parts of Sweden. And those 1,400 trucks would, if they were electric, need charging either in this area or somewhere close to this area. So, and then there are 10,000 vehicles passing by on the motorway nearby this area as well. That would also have to be charged in case they'd been electric.
And you mentioned every 60 kilometers, a charging station, because otherwise you're going to get these very long, massive trucks just huddling along the highway. Not exactly the best impression of safety when you're driving along the highway. What's the speed limit in Sweden, by the way?
We have a speed limit of maximum 120 on motorways, but most stretches of motorway have a speed limit of 110.
Okay.
And then we have the major roads with 70, 80 or 90.
Yeah, I mean, not slow speeds. I mean, Switzerland's also 120, and you've mentioned Germany, and that in itself is a completely different world. But yeah, not exactly the best feeling of safety. That makes me think of, freight, and just logistics itself is a whole world that has so many different considerations, as well as, I guess, the efficiency of the transportation and delivery of goods as well, so that the city ticks. So massive, massive challenge. But yeah, I do like myself good maps. So I'm very intrigued by the projects about the maps. And I think that's really one potential way we can then try and bring in some of the shift that we need. Better planning, better or smarter systems that can help, I guess, users and car owners, EV owners plan out their trips better, and also allow planners to position the charging stations more strategically as well, based on real-time data, based on usage. But that, once again, as you said, it's just a whole complex system that we're just beginning to understand as well, what's required for the shift.
Yes, absolutely. And one aspect that could solve a lot of the charging issues.
Oh yeah, do tell me.
Would be the investment in electric roads. With tracks in the road surfaces by which vehicles could charge while driving.
That works.
There are different technologies for electric roads. There is the type of system with cables in the air and pantographs for trucks and buses, so they could charge while driving. But that couldn't be used by cars. So in order to build a system that could also be used by cars, we could install tracks in the road surface so that all vehicles could be charging using the electric roads. But that would imply a really big investment that would be paid back maybe in 15 years, 20 years, something like that, when the fleets of electric vehicles had grown enough for this to be possible to pay back.
I guess, 10 years ago, you wouldn't have thought that things like wireless charging were possible, but now you can just buy a wireless charger for your iPhone. And yeah, 10 years ago, I actually saw, I think it was I can't remember exactly where, but it was a video of, I think, a staircase, which they turned into an energy generation kind of machine just from people's movements. So I guess some of these things have been around. But yeah, charging while driving, we see that in public transport, yes, a lot of the wire systems that are sort of hanging above tram lines and stuff, but it feels like something out of science fiction, but really becoming reality now.
Yeah, you still need, of course, to generate the electricity, but you can bypass local power grids and take power from the national transmission grids instead. And by that, reduce the amount you need to invest in the expansion of power grids. So you'd reduce the amount of charging needed, you'd reduce the investment in some areas, but you'd increase, of course, the investment in the electric road systems themselves. But you would prepare society for a situation where we'd have, the majority of vehicles would be electric, and we would reduce the time needed for charging dramatically, because we wouldn't need to stop, once in a while to charge along motorways when we drive longer distances. But we wouldn't be able to see the advantages of this at this point. We wouldn't see it until we'd had a bigger share of electric vehicles, and we realized that all these vehicles on these roads will need charging somewhere, and we'd have to build those football fields of chargers, and we could avoid some of those.
No, that sounds very interesting. And I guess, it's only a matter of time before we then have different kinds of infrastructures that we can use. I think the most fundamental aspect in the projects you described, and they're very diverse projects, and also the challenge we face. I mean, on the one hand, it is a system shift, but at the same time, even though it sounds daunting, it feels like everywhere you look, there are also opportunities and not just challenges. And I guess that's really also your philosophy at the Get Institute and how you also approach global electrification and scaling up sustainable electrification.
Absolutely. When we look at the change to electric vehicles, automotive companies and decision makers have emphasized the aspect that it takes fewer hours to assemble and build an electric vehicle compared to a diesel or petrol vehicle, because there are fewer parts in the electric engines and fewer moving parts. So we need less maintenance. So we could reduce the time it takes to build a car by, say, 30% or something like that. But that would make a lot of people unemployed. Instead, we need to use those resources to expand charging infrastructure. We need to reinforce power grids, and we need to train people in order to be able to do all these tasks. And we need also, as I mentioned earlier, strategists and architects that could plan these large-scale changes from a system perspective.
I like the use of the terms. Yeah. I mean, definitely architects and strategists, and being strategic about it in the first place, because, on the one hand, when you bring out EVs to the market, people are like, ooh, shiny new object, I want one. And then realize very quickly that the infrastructure for it is not exactly in the most convenient places. I mean, now in Switzerland, at least, I see charging stations everywhere. And, when I was looking into, I was getting my driver's license in Switzerland. So when I was looking into, a Tesla and what's involved there, I started to realize, actually, you can charge these pretty quickly. The only inconvenience is the location. But yeah, I guess lifestyle changes. I've never rented a Tesla or any other EV, but is the boot space then bigger because everything is a lot less in terms of part numbers? I mean, that could be a lifestyle, incentive.
Yes. No, the boot space is usually smaller. I don't have a Tesla. I have a smaller electric car. But if you get like Passat or Renault Megane or something like that, I think you'd get the equivalent boot space, but you'd pay a little more for the vehicle. Overall, in order to make electrification more efficient, we'd need to use smaller vehicles when possible. So I have a small vehicle, a small electric car, but I also have a petrol car in order to make it possible for me to drive longer distances without stopping and needing to plan. So I have an old petrol car. I also, when I need to pull a trailer, I use my petrol car. Or in other situations when the small car isn't sufficient.
Yeah, I guess we're still in that transition period. And they say if you're trying to transform society in a certain way, there's always growing pains. And at the start, it's also still very clunky. And, we have to work with, I guess, the best of both worlds and do what we can to embrace the new technology and still rely somewhat on the older ones. But Mats, it's been super interesting. We've really gone across different domains in this topic of electrification of the mobility network. But when we think about it, so half the world's or half the city's energy use just to electrify mobility sustainably. So you're also looking at how we can scale this up to every other aspect of our daily lives. I mean, that feels like an impossible challenge. And how do we then accomplish the more broader sustainable electrification?
Yes. Well, we need to realize that we can't do this without analysis, and we can't do this without a lot of people being able to take part in this type of discussion. So it's a matter of building competence on a broad scale, with many people being able to participate in projects and being able to plan, not only build vehicles or install chargers or reinforce power grids, but being able to take the overall perspective involving all of those and see like how much resources will we need and how much investment will be needed in order to expand vehicle fleets to 20% electric. So and I don't think we can even plan for the complete electrification until we have reached a certain share of the fleets being electric. It seems to be very difficult for many people to understand or to envision the situation when we will need electric roads, for example. But if we want to be able to use electric roads 15 years ahead or 20 years ahead, we need to start building them right now. And if we need to use other new technologies on a large scale, we need to start to build them right now. But electric roads is such a big thing. We need large amounts of tracks. We need large amounts of new power. We need large amounts of transformers along major roads to supply the electricity to electric roads and so on. And there are so many different things.
All the moving parts again, yeah.
Like it's hundreds of thousands of tons of steel and hundreds of thousands of tons of electrical equipment and so on. And that's not comparable to like 10 million chips for computers. You can easily build a big plant to produce several 100 million chips, I suppose, per year.
I guess, yeah. You just reminded me of the smartphone market. I was thinking, well, if we can revolutionize the smartphone, at least the smartphone revolutionizing telecommunications, like how is this different? And you're literally going into that field. Yeah. There's a lot more moving parts here.
Yeah. If we want to build electric roads across Europe, we need to build a big plant for manufacturing those tracks and for manufacturing those transformers and so on. And even with the power equipment industry is expanding, but not due to the need for equipment for electrification, but due to the need for data centers for AI applications. If we want to expand the power equipment industry with companies like Hitachi and so on to support the transformation to electric vehicles, we really need to look at what type of expansion will be needed in the manufacturing of transformers, for example, and, chargers or perhaps tracks for electric roads.
And I guess using electric vehicles as one driving force first to then bring in the infrastructure manufacturing that can then, I guess, be adapted to many other aspects of the urban energy system. And once we have something available, I guess it's a matter of adapting it to manufacture parts that we can then use in the households or in other parts of the city to power it.
Yes,
yeah,
definitely. And by building rockets, we learned a lot about new technologies. We learned a lot about new materials as knowledge that could be applied in many different areas. And it will be the same with this development, that if we start to take this seriously and we start to build the resources for this transformation, we will also build the resources and knowledge and whatnot for development in lots of other areas.
No, definitely. And you wrote a book, your most recent book, actually. It's called How Building the Future Really Works, From Information Technologies and Space Technologies to Power Production and Electromobility, What Society Needs to Take the Next Leap Forward. Listeners, it's available on Amazon. You can definitely check it out. One quote in particular stood out there, and that is that, first of all, we need to admit that we do not know exactly how to build the future. Then we need to start building it. I mean, it really reflects, in a way, what you've just illustrated. They are potential ideas. We do not have that certain knowledge, but I guess it feels like if we're going to transition at all, we just need to start.
Yes, and we need to take the complexity and the scale of this seriously. We can't continue just to assume that it will go by itself, the transition, but that we actually need to plan it, that we need to train people to master the different disciplines needed in the change process.
Yeah, that's true. Are you optimistic that we're going to hit the 2035 target, that we can transition that fast?
No, I don't think we can. I think we need to retract our steps, and we need to do some mapping, do some competence development and analyze the situation and then move forward.
Do you think that we have the technology available and it just needs to be optimized, or is there really something that's missing?
Most of the technology is available, but we need the solutions that are more cost effective.
Yeah.
Of course, the computer development over the past 50, 60 years illustrates this, because we went from mainframes to mini computers, then to laptops and smartphones. And the smartphone today can do what the mainframe could, much more than the mainframe could 50 years ago. So we couldn't possibly foresee what will happen in this development. We can only say that a lot will be possible and become possible. And we will, if we take it seriously, we will see how new solutions replace the ones that we use today. And I think, for example, that electric roads, that's a solution that exists, but that hasn't been investigated thoroughly enough in order to see how it can be applied and what will happen if we use it.
definitely lots of innovation happening in this space. And I guess that's why that quote really resonates as well. I mean, we don't know how to build it, but at least the optimistic message is we're trying many different ways. Your philosophy from earlier, there are a lot of opportunities, and at least many are exploring those opportunities. And I guess one or two solutions will then make themselves very visible as the way forward, I guess.
Yes.
At least I hope.
Definitely. It's always been that way in the past, and I think it will be that way in the future as well. We discover important things when we really engage with challenges.
No, definitely. And I think we've overcome many of the challenges we faced and definitely made society more efficient to a certain extent. And I guess it's now the same in the sustainability area that we have to now tackle.
Absolutely. Yes, I agree.
Yeah. There's one elephant in the room in all this. When I hear, maps, smarter systems, making processes more efficient, information, and really bringing together all the complex pieces. What's your opinion on how AI and where AI is going can help in this whole spiel? And what are your general thoughts on AI?
Yes. Well, AI, of course, will offer fantastic opportunities. It will help us solve problems. It will help us make calculations, analyses. And what we're seeing today is just the beginning of what will be possible in a few years' time. So, and given the small amount of people who are at present knowledgeable about the system aspects of this change, I think we'll need AI to help us calculate and analyze different aspects related to the change. But this will also, I fear, make us dependent on AI, not only in this area, but also in other areas. And AI is likely to replace human expertise. It's likely to replace human creativity, and it's likely to it will offer employees the opportunity to use AI instead of employing humans. And AI doesn't charge salaries, it doesn't need vacation, it doesn't quit its job, and so on.
There's that risk there, yes. The doom and gloom scenario.
Yeah.
But I guess ultimately it comes down to how we can use it efficiently to help the transition, especially when you think AI and you're in energy, the energy usage or energy footprint of AI is also not exactly small. It's not, I guess, extreme like some people like to talk about, but when you compare the numbers, there is still a substantial amount of energy being used there.
Yes. Definitely, it does drive, as I understand, the expansion of the power equipment industry for the moment to a large extent. And it's going to continue to require investment. It's going to require knowledge development, but it's also going to require some control in order to contain the effects, the consequences of the large-scale implementation of AI.
No, definitely. And so what's in store for you? What exciting things are you working on now that you're looking forward to going forward in the future?
Well, I'm looking into the opportunity to do further projects in the area of electromobility, to find ways to map the power need, map the need for chargers, and to spread this knowledge about the resource requirements for large-scale change to more people, to decision makers and to more experts and to the automotive industry and so on.
Fantastic. And yes, listeners, if you want to definitely read more into some of these ideas and philosophies, do check out Mats's books. There are quite a few interesting ones and definitely around circular economy, but also the energy futures and where we're heading. And we'll put links to those in the show notes. But yeah, Mats, it's been fascinating hearing your insights, and I'm myself learning and getting so many ideas around what we can do to support this transition, given there are opportunities everywhere. But like I do with every guest, I'd love to get into some questions that I ask all my guests so that listeners can know even more about you.
Yes, please do.
In your view, I mean, innovation, that's, really the core of this. We have to innovate and disrupt if we want to create a transition. So in your view, what does the word innovation truly mean, and how has it shaped the way you approach challenges or opportunities in your work?
Well, innovation to me is when new innovative products or ideas are made use of on a larger scale. They're taken to the market. There are a lot of innovative technologies that never do that never go further than the drawing board or the mind of the innovator. But to be a real innovation, it has to be applied on a large scale and used by a large number of people or corporate customers or whatever.
Very interesting take on that. And I guess, yes, an idea can be potentially blue sky, but unless it's implemented and adopted widely, I guess it's hard to call it an innovation. It would be in a creative experiment or creative product. And I guess disruption, to use a similar term, would be even bigger than that, or even larger scale than that.
Yes, disruption would be, well, when society changes on a substantial scale and hundreds of thousands of people need to lead their lives in new ways or go to work using different types of transportation or plan their day in a new way. So that is in order to use new technologies or to use system solutions and so on.
Very interesting comparison, and also the scales, but totally understandable. We saw that with the smartphone markets. We're seeing that with AI now, and hopefully with electric vehicles in the future. Complete disruption and societal shift, or paradigm shift even. But yeah, very interesting insights. Was there a key moment, event, person, or book that completely changed the course of your career or your mindset?
There was actually a book I read in 2005, something like that, and that helped me get into this development. And that was, the title of that book was The Party's Over by Richard Heimberg. And it described, or it investigated the future reduction in oil production, the peak in oil production, and the decline in oil production that would follow. And I realized when I read that if oil production is going to decline, we will need to change transportation systems to renewable fuels. And we can't wait to do that because it will take decades to make that change. And that drove me to start to investigate these things. And now it's turned out that oil production has not yet peaked. It's still being discussed, but when it peaks, it's going to decline and so on. And we are not yet at the point where we have changed to electric vehicles on a large enough scale to make us independent of oil. We are still very dependent on oil, and oil production still increases by a few percent every year. So that book led me into this path, and it started me to investigate all these aspects that we've now discussed here today. And I think there are aspects of those experiences and those forecasts that we will see and need to take into account for the future.
It's incredible to see that a single book can really change your mindset and really drive you and define the career that you have now. So we'll have to check it out. I guess it's good that maybe the peak production is being delayed because it gives us maybe a bit more time. I'm not saying that we should take the time. We definitely should be acting fast, but no, definitely a nice moment, I guess, that really then opened your mind to a completely different world and potential as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What tips and strategies can you offer in terms of time management? I mean, running your own institute, you're doing white papers, you're writing books, but you're also doing projects. I mean, time management is a key aspect of it. How do you maintain a balance between your professional and your personal time?
Well, firstly, I very much enjoy my work, and I try to work 8 hours per day, but sometimes it becomes 9 and so on. But and then I write books once in a while, which I sometimes need to spend time in the evening doing, and so on. But I think it's always important to focus and to prioritize the most important things that you need to do. But that's also, I find, very difficult, especially when you are confronted with different opportunities. You get messages from people. Could we do this together or that together? And it's difficult to say no, but it's important still to not take on every new project and to follow every lead that you could possibly do. And well, I suppose focus, trying to be efficient in what you do, trying not to be too detailed, but try to, in my case, to keep the high level perspective that could make me avoid going into every tiny detail in every single thing.
It's too easy to say yes to everything. I'm certainly guilty of that, and I'm getting used to saying no now, so a lot more than often. But either way, and I also know there's a book in me somewhere, which at some point I should try and sit down and write. So any specific tips on authorship? So I write journal papers, but not books.
Yes. Well, I've always found it easy to write, and I often use spare time to write, like time I couldn't use for other things, like when I go on a train or back and forth to work in the morning and evening, when I used to do that before COVID, or when I wait at airports, at train stations, etc. But that's not always possible for everyone because not all people can focus in those types of environments. But I'm lucky enough that I'm able to. So I think there are different challenges for different people, and you need to find your own pace and find your own moments when you can write, set aside perhaps a few hours now and then and do the writing, and not listen too much to people like myself who have other ways of doing things.
Yeah, and I've heard similar stories. Actually, there's a famous author, Simon Sinek, author of Start With Why and many other books. I heard a podcast with him once, and he said it's different for every book he writes. There was one book he wrote where he had to take the same flight across the US multiple times because he could only focus on the plane. So I guess you're right. Find your way, find what works for you. I'm certainly trying to get used to the fact that if I'm on a train or I'm in a bus or, somewhere and I have spare time to do something, whether it's writing or something else. So, but yeah, it's good that you, I guess, reinforce that, because I thought that was going to have to be the way. Everyone has their own environment where they somehow have that meditative state to then do the work, whether it's programming, writing a book or something else.
Yes. And basically, you can't wait for inspiration. You simply have to get down to it. If
So
I have to be inspired to work or to write a book, I'd never get around to it. You just need to make it a habit instead of waiting to get the inspiration.
Yeah. Only then will the inspiration and motivation come, I guess. They always say action creates it. It's a loop. No, nice. What is your favorite childhood memory?
What is my favorite? That's a big question. Okay. Wow. Playing golf is a really nice childhood memory.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed playing golf in my teens and did it for a few years. I was never world class or something like that, but it was a really good experience, good friendship.
I'm laughing because I've also played golf in my teens, and I remember my dad always said, it's called golf because all the other 4-letter words were taken. It's really a game of the mind, and at least from my own experience, the impatience of not being able to hit the ball properly, I think was a bit of a challenge there.
Running was also a very nice memory from my youth and childhood.
Yeah, there's something magical about running, especially outside in nature.
Yes, definitely.
So with all that and all the experiences and also the challenges that you've illustrated on today's episode, I guess, what was one of the most challenging situations that you have ever faced in your career to date, and how did you overcome it?
Wow, I've been fortunate in a way. I haven't faced so many of those challenging situations. I've been fortunate enough to be able to build in small steps, but I've also had to deal with the realization that this change is not going to go as fast as I believed initially, because I thought we have a big challenge ahead of us where we're going to face multiple challenges, the climate change, the need to change because of the peak in oil production. And that is going to force us as the human race to mobilize resources towards change to electric vehicles, to sustainable transportation. But I've realized that hasn't gone as fast as I expected when I started to investigate these things. So that's been a challenge in itself, becoming aware of this and trying to
be patient.
Be patient. I realized I can't do anything about it. It doesn't help how many emails I send or how many people I talk to. It will not change the pace. The pace comes from the big decisions in society. And if the big decision makers won't make those decisions to invest money in the systems for electrification and so on, it doesn't matter how many books I write or how much energy I spend to try to investigate these things. So I have had to accommodate to a situation where things are going slower than I would have liked them to do.
And I guess it is practicing that incremental steps. And I mean, I was laughing at patience because I myself have challenges with patience and impatience, but it's been a big lesson for myself over the last few years as well. Change is slow. It can be fast, but it's usually a blip when society shifts. I mean, when we think smartphones, that also took a few years, but it was much faster than many other revolutions and evolutions. But yeah, I guess being able to persevere and have the grit to keep going, which you've been doing in the energy space for over 20 years now. So it's, you're an incredible example of that. So definitely nice to hear the message from you and really, to push that slowly and to not try to get frustrated, I guess, when things don't go as fast as you'd hope they would. But other than that incredible piece of advice, what other advice can you offer to young professionals starting out, especially those who then want to go into the energy sector?
Yes, I think power systems, electrical engineering will be a growth area in the future, regardless of what we believe about the future. So reinforcing power grids, building power generation, building charging infrastructure, all of those things will need to expand. And we will need a lot more electrical engineers and people with the system understanding to make these things become a reality.
And so, systems thinking, something that we definitely need a lot more. And also that critical thinking, I guess. What are your thoughts on that, especially with AI?
Yes, absolutely. We need to be able to see things from different perspectives. We need to realize that we get a lot of help from AI. Electric vehicles have big promises, but we also need to realize that there are downsides or challenges, threats connected to each of these developments that we also need to understand. So business knowledge is also an aspect that needs to be reinforced and emphasized, not only the ability to build new systems, but also to build businesses and to build cost-effective systems and competitive systems that could faster help us replace petrol and diesel technologies.
Definitely, making it more of an incentive to adopt as well. Nice tips as well for those deciding on what to study. As you said, what others say, we seem to think that with AI, we don't need, engineers anymore, electrical engineers at least. But no, that is definitely still very, very high up the list. I certainly see it that way as well. I mean, AI has to be powered by something too, right? So I think electrical power systems is a good area for the future. But Mats, we've covered the past, we've covered the history, we've covered your childhood, we've covered where you're going in the near future. But the question I asked all my guests towards the end of the show as we get close to finishing is, what would you most like to be remembered for?
I'd actually, that's this might sound presumptuous, but I've been one of the first authors to investigate the resources that will be needed to change transportation systems on a large scale to electromobility. And I'd like to be remembered for doing that. And I'd like more people to know that I did it and not only bypass it, because a lot of people will find it out sooner or later the hard way in many cases that, we now surpassed this point where we need to increase the power generation by 25%, but we've not done that. So, and didn't someone tell about this? Didn't anybody foresee that this would happen? Yes, someone did. And I'd like to be remembered for doing that.
And when the world then faces a lot of these challenges and crises, sometimes that critical piece of information is what can really help bring us forward. So I think from my side, thank you for doing that research and for having that tangible information that we can use to take action on. And I think we need more of that, that kind of information for many other sectors as well. How do we build that understanding, and how do we get people to know, okay, these are at least the first steps or the ingredients required to build change? And then hope that they take that on board and move forward. So, But where can people find you if they want to get in touch?
They can find me at www.getinstitute.com. Getinstitute.com.
Sounds good. Are you on social media?
I'm on LinkedIn. Absolutely. Some people have trouble finding me there, but they can look for Mats Larsson, Get Institute, and they probably will find me there. A lot of people are called Mats Larsson nowadays. But
okay. Is that a common name in Sweden?
Yeah, well, it's not uncommon. Let's put it like that. There are enough Mats Larssons for me to disappear in searches for some people, but others find me quite easily. So Mats Larsson, Industrial Development Center South, or GET Institute, and you'll find me.
Now, we'll definitely put that in the show notes. I was just reminded of, because I like to close the loop from what we start with at the start. And listeners, you might have noticed that. I do it intentionally. And also it comes naturally to me. And you gave me that perfect segue. But I'm thinking of Stieg Larsson, famous author. And, we were talking about criminal novels, or at least, nice Swedish stories. So I think, definitely a nice way to remember as well, your last name, and people can search for you up on LinkedIn. So we'll definitely put that, the link to the Get Institute, and a lot of topics that we've discussed today in the show notes so that listeners can go deeper on a lot of these aspects and take action as well on their own. But Mats, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. I've learned so much, especially about electrical vehicles, so that the next time I do consider getting one, I think there's just a whole world that will inform that decision as well.
Thank you very much, Peter. I really enjoyed our discussion and I really enjoyed being on your show. So excellent questions, great dialogue.
And like I do with every guest, I always give my guests the final message. So one last message of your choosing for the listeners to take away from today?
I'd like to say look forward and think ahead.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter.
And that wraps up our insightful, fascinating and informative episode with Mats Larsson. For recommendations on Swedish crime novels, cuisine and jogging routes, a guide to the latest trends and models of electric vehicles, or recommended reading on energy, check out the show notes for more information over at peterembach.com/podcast. And as always, thank you listeners for tuning into this episode and for your feedback and support. If you are enjoying the show, I would be incredibly grateful if you could share this podcast with your family, friends, colleagues, and even fellow authors. Subscribe or follow this podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, other podcast channels, or follow the LinkedIn group to stay up to date with the latest releases. If you're curious about me or my work in general, you can also check out my website or social media. Head to peterembach.com, my YouTube channel, Peter Marcus Bach, that's Marcus with a C, or follow me on X at peterembach or Instagram at peterembach87. Feel free to reach out to me with any feedback or guest suggestions so that I can keep improving this show. The podcast's intro and outro song is called Starsky by Alex Kieran. Stay tuned for our next episode and next guest to hear how they are tackling the grand challenges.